Now the news and sport with Maurice Stewart and David Icke.
The European summit collapses without agreement. They'll meet again in February. The baby, whose heart operation was postponed 5 times, has died. A memorial service for the victims of the King's Cross fire. The Princess of Wales joins the families and rescuers. The Football League says Robert Maxwell can buy Watford, but he's selling Oxford first. And Bob Geldof in Ethiopia, a special report on the threat of another famine. Good evening. The European Community Summit, aimed at resolving the organization's financial crisis, has ended in failure. Community leaders abandoned talks in Copenhagen after a day of haggling over how to limit spending on agricultural subsidies. That's the issue on which Mrs. Thatcher has been standing firm in the face of French and German opposition. She said it was better to try again than have a fudged agreement, so community leaders will reconvene in Brussels in February.
Others might drive to the summit, but President Mitterrand of France preferred to walk, and with him went the man with the briefcase containing France's nuclear trigger. Even so, the passers-by received a presidential greeting. But the leaders, as they assembled, were well aware of the kind of signal that failure to agree here would send to the outside world. After all, if the superpowers can decide to do away with nuclear weapons, the community ought to agree on the price of groceries. And since they couldn't agree, they decided to put a positive face on it. All the same, as the evening wore on, the Germans had to give way a little on their resistance to strict binding controls on Europe's agricultural spending. Certainly, Mrs. Thatcher, who wants the strictest controls possible, had none of the defiance and irritability she's shown at some past summits. And when someone suggested that this one had been short on political content, she waived the various political statements that had been agreed. And even though the big decisions on agricultural spending had been put off here to yet another summit in Brussels, she felt she was getting somewhere.
At last we're coming to grips with that. The real detail has been done and a great deal of discussion upon it. The arguments about how much and so on, but it has been on the detail.
But do you think there'll be nastiness next time in Brussels?
No, I don't necessarily think unpleasantness. I think that there'll be quite a lot of disagreement on how much should go onto what particular thing.
All the same, it's been 10 years since Mrs. Thatcher's predecessor, James Callaghan, forecast that agricultural spending would be the final straw that broke the camel's back. But the camel's back has proved to be a lot more resistant than successive British governments have thought, and the final straw is still to come.
The Prime Minister tonight extended her deepest sympathy to the parents of David Barber, the 8-week-old baby who died in Birmingham's Children's Hospital this morning. David underwent whole-in-the-heart surgery 10 days ago after the operation was postponed 5 times. He was due to return home today. David's mother, Diane, said the doctors had done all they could.
Tiny David Barber was due to go home this morning, but late last night his mother was called to his bedside. He died at 10 to 3. Staff at the Birmingham Children's Hospital were shocked. David had appeared to recover so well from his operation 10 days ago.
We carried out what we would regard as standard forms of resuscitation, which initially appeared to be successful, but regretfully ultimately were unsuccessful.
A shortage of specialist nurses had delayed the operation 5 times. David's desperate mother tried to force the health authorities' hand with an application to the High Court, insisting on surgery. She believed the delay was risking her baby's life. But this afternoon, after a post-mortem, the Birmingham coroner said the fact that the operation was delayed and the shortage of nursing staff had no bearing on the cause of death. He said the baby died from natural causes. There would be no inquest. The family's MP, Mark Fisher, is challenging that. He's seeking legal advice to try to force the coroner to investigate in the national interest. But tonight, the baby's distraught parents said they don't want any further inquiry. They believe the doctors did all they could.
A memorial service has been held a few hundred yards from King's Cross Station for the victims of the fire there last month. The Princess of Wales personally requested to join the mourners, bereaved families and friends. Among hundreds of other sympathisers were members of the emergency services.
The Princess of Wales had said she wanted no fuss, no formality. She was there, half a mile from King's Cross Station, simply to share in the grief and the prayers. And she was just one of many mourners in a service that united several denominations. Civic grief mingled with private sorrow. There were the relatives of the 31 people who died and representatives of those who tried to save them. The lesson from the Transport Secretary, Paul Channon.
And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain.
It was more than just a time of sorrow, though. The Bishop of Edmonton said there should be thanks for heroism like that of the fireman who died.
We continue to remember the sacrifice made by Colin Townley, who gave his life to save others. In these days, when it can be too easy to criticize public servants, we need to give thanks for the selfless devotion of so many.
It had been a simple and dignified act of remembrance, shared between churches and between families united only by tragedy. A service in memory of those who died and of comfort for those who mourn.
President Reagan has called the nuclear arms treaty he'll sign with the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev a good bargain for the West. It was, he said, a joint achievement that advanced the goals of the United States and its allies.
The hopes are high and the preparations almost completed, both outside the White House, where the park opposite has become an electronic encampment for the TV networks, and inside the administration, where the message today was upbeat, both from the presidential spokesman, Marlin Fitzwater.
In dialogue lies the hope for peace, and in strength lies the basis for negotiation. We are ready to talk.
And from Mr. Reagan himself in his weekly radio address.
Even as we Americans strive to spread freedom through the world, we must also recognize our obligation to ensure the peace. This summit meeting and treaty represent just that, steps taken together to ensure the peace.
The Soviet-American event started early with a rally outside the White House by the American peace movement. It was their celebration, they said, and the treaty was their victory.
I've got to care, I've got to love, I've got to give.
A group of Soviet and foreign children then tried to hand in flowers at the White House and at the Soviet embassy. The White House refused.
We cannot accept it.
The embassy accepted.
That accommodates kids.
A small public relations victory for the Russians, and a sign that whatever else this summit suffers from, it won't be a lack of world attention.
And at RAF Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire, arrangements are underway to welcome the Soviet leader when he arrives there on Monday. Mr. Gorbachev is stopping off in Britain for several hours on his way to the Washington summit. He'll be meeting Mrs. Thatcher for talks and a working lunch.
Security at this RAF base is tighter than ever. They're more used to working with Tri-Stars and VC-10s here, but on Tuesday an Ilyushin 62 flew in from Moscow on a reconnaissance mission. For 4 hours, Soviet security men reviewed facilities before flying home again. Now at RAF Bryce Norton, they're rolling out the red bunting in preparation, just over a week since they first heard they'd be refueling the Soviet leader's plane and laying on a mini-summit. The two leaders will be meeting in this room in the officers' mess, accompanied by interpreters, while their foreign ministers hold parallel talks next door. Today in the kitchens, it's just a dress rehearsal. Lucky RAF officers and their wives will enjoy the results. On Monday, it'll be for real.
It is the most prestigious meal I've done. I've done royal visits before, but it's a very great honour to be able to cook for the Soviet visitor here.
Outside, even the roads are being washed. For 2 brief hours, this officers' mess will be the focus of world attention when Mr. Gorbachev and Mrs. Thatcher come to lunch.
And Mr. Gorbachev's arrival on Monday morning will be broadcast live at 11:30 on BBC One. The lives of at least 3 million people in Ethiopia are again threatened by famine. Drought has decimated the harvest. But it's the country's long-running civil war, which has been blamed for preventing the distribution of relief supplies, that has done most to create the latest crisis. Bob Geldof, whose efforts helped provide vital aid during the disaster 3 years ago, is back in Ethiopia to see the situation for himself. Our special correspondent, Christopher Morris, joined him for visits to 2 relief camps.
The nightmare is a recurring one. Once more, thousands of Ethiopians facing starvation are assembling at Korum, where during the last famine just 2 years ago, 100 people died every day. Their arrival this time, again in search of food, follows official warnings of a catastrophe on a similar scale. Bob Geldof witnessed the plight of Korum's famine victims on his previous visit, and now many of the young children in their rags who rushed to greet him owe their lives to his fundraising for Band-Aid. But none of them knew who he was or had even heard of the name Bob Geldof. This was the other caring side of the rock singer, anxious to know about the latest famine crisis. Can another tragedy be averted in time? Korum has now become the main food distribution centre in this drought-stricken area. About 100 people a day used to come here 3 months ago. Now it's 3,000 every day and increasing, with food stocks running out fast. In their desperation, forced by hunger of failed crops and continuing civil war, these people have walked for several days to reach Korum. Now, exhausted, weak and malnourished, they wait patiently their turn to collect rations for the other members of their families, many of whom were too sick to make the long journey. What the relief agencies are desperate to avoid this time are the food distribution centres like this one at Korum being transformed into massive refugee camps. Camps which, in 1984, soon turned into breeding grounds of disease and infections in which tens of thousands died. As the famine tightens its grip, so the food handouts are being cut back by half. Each person now restricted to 15 kilos of grain to last a month. For the moment, though, those reaching Korum are not suffering the severe effects of starvation as they did before.
They're here not because they like walking for 2 days, 3 days from their homes, but because they anticipate serious problems soon. Their main crop, which should be harvested about now, has failed, it seems, almost completely from what they tell us. And because they anticipate a serious problem if they don't come, they're here now.
Despite the war, some relief convoys are managing to get through, but with guerrillas frequently cutting off the main roads, supplies are sporadic. At least this time, the Ethiopian authorities and the international relief agencies are prepared to fight the famine. Last time at Alamata, there were scenes of pandemonium every time rations arrive for distribution. Today, it's a much more orderly exercise, with no panic. Yellow ration cards are issued to ensure that everyone gets their fair share. Over 100,000 people around Alamata are facing starvation. 62,000 of them are children. But under the system introduced by the Ethiopian authorities, peasant associations have been set up, to which every family in need has to register. When they do this, they're entitled to visit Alamata Food Distribution Centre once a month to collect their rations. But those rations are running dangerously low, though Bob Geldof was genuinely surprised by what he saw.
The most positive thing is that all the infrastructure that was put in place in 84 and 85, the trucking, the aid agencies, the early warning systems that were put in with the RRC, and that seemed to have worked up till now. I mean, the situation in 1984 was complete chaos, and that is not the case now. That's a good thing.
What do you see then as the main problem now?
I think the main problem will be the potential, or indeed the famine as it is in Tigray and Eritrea, 100% crop loss and 80% crop loss respectively. And that has been compounded by the fact of the military activity in the area, which is intense. And they have closed the roads, and the rebels have, and are not permitting any traffic to move on it whatsoever, be it military or relief food. And I think the most urgent thing now must be to get those roads open.
Many Ethiopians in the worst affected provinces of Eritrea and Tigray have had enough of the war and the famine. They're now voluntarily seeking resettlement in the south, a policy originally enforced by the government and condemned by the world, but a policy these suffering Ethiopians now see as the only way to survive.
10 blind children from Beirut arrived at Heathrow Airport tonight to take part in a special event which will send a Christmas message of goodwill to the hostages in Lebanon. They're among a group of children from all over the world invited to London by the British Scientific and Technology Trust. The youngsters, some of whom were blinded in the fighting in Lebanon, will collect keys donated by famous people to hang on Christmas trees as a symbol of goodwill. They'll also take back medical supplies provided by the trust. The Football League has dropped its court action against Robert Maxwell and his attempt to take over Watford Football Club. In return, Mr. Maxwell says his family will sell their interests in Oxford United. With news of that and the rest of the day's news, here's David Icke.
The League withdrew their opposition to the Watford takeover after a meeting between Mr. Maxwell and the League president, Philip Carter. The League was concerned that Mr. Maxwell would control 3 First Division clubs, Oxford, Derby and now Watford. But even though the Maxwell family are selling their interest in Oxford, they'll still control 2 clubs when the League rules say no one should control more than 1. Coincidentally, Derby were playing Watford at the baseball ground this afternoon, but Mr. Maxwell wasn't there.
Messrs Maxwell and John were expected to fly in by helicopter. Instead, the Watford team simply arrived by bus, unaware of and untroubled by the day's developments.
I'm not interested in it. I'm only interested in the football.
Mr. Maxwell never turned up, but somehow he was everywhere. He'd have appreciated the irony as a former Watford player, Nigel Callaghan, crossed for Mark Wright midway through the first half. Derby won up with the England international's first goal for the club. As the second half opened, Watford scored an immediate equaliser. Wright blamed keeper Shilton, who wasn't answering back. Glyn Hodges, meanwhile, was taking the credit. It was no less than the visitors deserved, and later Blissett almost won them the match. On a day of compromise, a draw was quite appropriate, though no one should suspect this even-handed result between the 2 Maxwell clubs. This was a hard-fought game. Derby won, Watford won.
Elsewhere, Perry Groves was among the Arsenal scorers as they beat Sheffield Wednesday 3-1, and Brian Robson scored for Manchester United in the 2-0 win at Queen's Park Rangers. Arsenal move within 2 points of Liverpool, who play Chelsea tomorrow. Nottingham Forest drew at Wimbledon, and Everton did the same at Charlton. 2 non-league clubs are through to the 3rd round of the FA Cup after beating league opposition. Yeovil won at Cambridge and Sutton beat Peterborough in today's 2nd round. In Scotland, Frank McAvenny scored all the Celtic goals in the 4-0 win at Morton that keeps them on top of the Premier Division. But Hearts are only a point behind after they beat Falkirk.
25 minutes into the match, a harmless-looking Kenny Blacklob almost opened the scoring. Roddy Manley clearing the danger. 7 minutes later, Falkirk were in trouble. Gary Mackay made the opening, Robertson held the ball and Mackay went down attempting the 1-2. Robertson stepped up for the spot kick and scored his 7th penalty of the season. In the second half, Falkirk created more chances and in the final minute almost snatched a dramatic equaliser as Stuart Remains had only Smith to beat. That chance squandered, Hearts held out for victory.
In the other matches at the top of the Premier Division, Aberdeen won 2-1 at Dundee and Rangers won 1-0 against Dundee United. Racing, there was an astonishing incident at Chepstow when the horses crashed through a rail across the course. It happened in the Prince of Wales Novices Chase after the runners had been directed onto the wrong course. The leader, Foo's Lady, fell heavily, but both horse and jockey were unhurt. The race was declared void and there'll be an inquiry into the incident.
And that's the news and sport tonight. From David and me, good night.
Now that the crucial stage of the negotiations between the Liberals and the SDP is over, Vivian White in tomorrow's This Week, Next Week will be asking, will the merger work? Joining him will be party leaders David Steele and Robert McLennan. Well, that's tomorrow afternoon on BBC One at 1 o'clock. And now, here's Michael Fish.
Good evening to you. It's more of the same, really, as far as the weather's concerned. This area of low pressure is not moving very far, nor is that front, and we're going to keep these cloud-laden easterly winds. Mind you, in a day or two's time, this front's going to come down from the north, introduce colder weather, clearer weather too, but with some really sharp frosts around at night. A lot of cloud over the British Isles, stretching down into Europe, where the weather's been just as unsettled. Now, tonight, a lot of cloud around, still some bursts of rain scattered about as well, but the cloud beginning to break in northwestern parts, perhaps sufficient breaks in western Scotland, again for 1 or 2 fog patches, becoming quite misty and murky in the more southern parts as well. Now, temperatures generally with that cloud and the breeze holding up above freezing, but where those breaks do come along, it's going to get uncomfortably close, and I think there will be a touch of frost in some of those western parts of Scotland. Tomorrow, a day very much like today, a lot of cloud around, quite dull and misty, at least to begin with. Some patchy fog in that northern part of Scotland. Still some little bits and pieces of rain, too, more especially in those southern counties, and perhaps a few spots coming in along that eastern coast. But much of that will tend to die away as the day goes on, although it's going to remain pretty cloudy, but some brightness perhaps breaking through in western parts there, and the best of any brightness in northwest Scotland. Perhaps late on in the day, some wintry showers showing in northeast Scotland. Temperatures rather like today's and a little bit on the chilly side.
We've got the world there. What's above the world? What's above the world? Space. Yeah, take a walk.
Space
take a walk.
walk.
Walk in space.
Oh,
walk
no.
in space.
My husband will be laughing his head off.
You just got one wrong. You got one wrong, but you got 4 right, and you've won these prizes.
Yes, you've won a luxury food processor, a personal stereo, a deep fat fryer, and an instant print camera plus 6 packs of film. All brought to you courtesy of Catchphrase.
That's £890, ladies and gentlemen. How about that?
Absolutely. I can't believe it. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. You're a great player of the game. You remember the golden rule. You saw it, you said it, and you won it. You won a lot of money. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for playing Catchphrase. See you soon.
Silla's back on the prowl, and watch out for Bob, too. It's a brand new series of Surprise, Surprise.
Your daughter, actually, Fiona, wrote and told us that you've got this very unusual ambition.
Oh, no.
And Silla makes a special Teddy phone call.
Surprise, surprise, Den. It's Silla here.
It's not.
Oh, yes, it is. She's back with brand new surprises. Sunday at 7:15.
And there are surprises for Peter O'Toole, Faye Dunaway and Peter Cook when they come up against Helen Slater as Supergirl in our movie premiere coming up after the break. Movie premiere. This one was made in 1984. It's Supergirl. Hello again. Well, life has never been simple for Izzy, certainly in the past. Now, will things get better? Or will she be led once again up the garden path?
Programmes this Thursday evening on TSW begin at 7 o'clock with Emmerdale, followed at 7:30 by Survival, the first 30 years, which looks at the fascinating life of the hedgehog. At 8, The Bill investigate a violent hijacking.
Harry? How are we treating you? I'm looking for information.
Did you see the face of the man holding you? No!
Yesterday afternoon, Rosalind Shays was arrested for SNL fraud.
What?
You're kidding. She could actually be going to jail.
Yes!
Oh, isn't that a shame? All right, now that's enough.
You want me to represent Rosalind Shays?
From what I understand, she's innocent. And
I doubt it.
I need just one to crumble, and the rest will fall.
You realize that you are pointing a gun at a New York City police officer.
Lucky me. Programme highlights this Thursday evening here on TSW.
At 10:30 tonight on TSW, join us for the regional news and the weather forecast. But first we go over to the studios of ITN to Trevor MacDonald and Fiona Armstrong for tonight's News at 10.
As a result of our extended news coverage, we've made a few changes to the rest of the evening here on BBC One, which sees the start of 2 new series. In a moment, That's Life, and then at 10:10 we begin the search for this year's mastermind. After which, Everyman at 10:40 follows the final days of a young woman facing death from leukemia, who was able to prepare her family and friends for the final parting. There's more news from the Gulf at 11:20 and again at 12:20, in between which education gets an airing in Clean Slate, followed by astronomy in The Sky at Night. The evening ahead here on BBC One, which continues now as we join Esther Ranson, returning with more consumer quirks and quibbles, which just go to prove that's life.
To run your fingers through mine? Yes, please.
To us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. We got some Red Indians in tonight. Well, welcome all of you. It's lovely for us all to be back with you for another series.
Don't miss the sporting action in Wednesday's midweek sports special on Central. Football, Barcelona meet Gothenburg in the European Cup and Real Madrid pay Inter Milan in the UEFA Cup. Boxing, Errol Christie's title eliminator and Tony Simpson against the American Alex Ramos. Midweek sports special, Wednesday sporting action at 10:30 on Central.
And yes, it's going to, very soon, be the return of Cannon and Ball. This momentous comedy event takes place at 7 on the evening of Saturday week.
News, sport and information in Derbyshire and Leicestershire. Central's roadshows in the East with news of your choice.
Friday comedy on Central, and John Thor in Home to Roost is about to be taught a lesson.
And the comment, makes no effort, lazy, wasting his time and ours. No wonder you hid it. If that was my report, I'd die of shame.
It is yours. Start dying, Dad. Home to Roost. Friday comedy at 8:30 on Central.
And this is your lineup for Friday evening, starting the weekend the right way here on Central. One of the highlights of this Friday evening, Roger Cook and the Central Weekend team with their current investigation. The time now, though, is 10 o'clock, news time.
BBC One's package of Christmas films includes Watership Down, a tale of rabbits and their fight for survival.
We've got to go away from the Warren, all of us.
Go away?
Yes, before it's too late.
There's nothing wrong with you.
You're all under arrest.
Under arrest?
What do you mean?
What for?
Spreading dissension, inciting to mutiny.
Watch this. See? Violet's gone.
Watership Down at 5:50 on Saturday on BBC One.
And now the Christmas Day weather details come from Bill Giles.
Good morning to you. Well, I wish I could have brought you this lovely snow for Christmas Day, but it's not to be, I'm afraid. It's much milder outside. The reason for that we can see on the Atlantic chart. There's a low pressure down to the southwest. That's feeding in a lot of strong winds and rain too. Now, this is the rainfall picture at the moment. Let's see how that's going to move over the next 24 hours.
Imagine a family magazine with superb sports coverage, news and business features, weather reports, holidays, and houses for sale, family finance, and theatre guides, plus rock news, quizzes, and jokes for the kids. Wouldn't it be rather heavy going? Not really. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Page the Oracle, the magazine on the screen. The crash diet for discerning coffee tables.
Good evening. It's now more than 1 year since I was last on this program. A year is a long time, and many things can happen. Over 365 days have gone. Over 8,700 hours have run away. I'm not going to bother about the minutes and the seconds. It's too many to count. But if we think of each one of us, or we think of our families, or we think of whole countries, England, or Ethiopia, Russia, France, India, or perhaps Australia. Many things have happened all over the place in that time. Good things and bad things. Important things and unimportant things. Happy things and sad things. Stupid things and clever things. Things that we are pleased to remember, and things that we want to forget. All of these things and many more weave together to make the history of the year, to make the life of the year. Ah, life. Yes, life goes on. The whole world of men and women and children goes on. And the world itself goes on. The basis of our life. And from the world comes much that is vital to our life. And the sun and the moon and the stars shine and continue to shine. How does it all continue? I myself believe, firstly, that there is a God over all. And secondly, that he keeps all of this continuing, going on, and that this is the greatest of all miracles. I pray that he continues to keep all of you in his care. Good night, and sleep well.
Thanks to Reverend Christopher Parsons for tonight's epilogue, Postscript, and he'll be back again tomorrow night at about midnight with another Postscript. And speaking of tomorrow, let's have a look at tomorrow's weather. After a rather cloudy start, there'll be sunny intervals, but coasts are likely to stay cloudy and misty. Winds will be light to moderate westerly, with temperatures reaching 21 degrees Celsius, that's 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And now the shipping forecast. Portland and Plymouth, southwest, veering westerly 6 or 7, decreasing 3 or 4. Occasional rain at first, moderate, with fog patches for a time. Lundy, southwesterly 5 or 6, becoming variable 3, occasional drizzle at first, moderate, with fog patches for a time. Well, now, what have we got? We've got another very varied evening for you tomorrow evening, starting at 7 o'clock with Emmerdale Farm. 7:30, you're invited to name that tune. And at 8 o'clock, Carry On Laughing, snippets from the best of the Carry On films. And at 9 o'clock, we join Travelling Man. After the news at 10, we have a documentary about probably one of the worst hated men ever, Dr. Joseph Mengele. That's our documentary at 10:34 tomorrow night. And so you'll catch up on that properly. Let's have a time check for you now. Well, it's just 5 past midnight and time for us all to go home. So on behalf of everybody at TSW and the transmitters, this is Stuart Hutchison wishing you all a very good night.
Up to the election gains momentum, Election Brief in a moment deals with the issue of agriculture and conservation.
Next on this Night of Dreams, a new series of voices focuses on Freud, his thought and his legacy. Tonight, critic George Steiner and the distinguished child psychologist Bruno Bettelheim will be discussing, among other things, the sexual explanation of dreams in Freud, For or Against.
Our film tomorrow night is, as you can see, at 9 o'clock. And it's the first of 3 on successive evenings starring Shirley MacLaine, The Turning Point, with Anne Bancroft, Leslie Brown, and, in his screen debut, the famous Russian dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov. It's a moving and dramatic story about the world of ballet and the past rivalry between 2 women which re-emerges when a leading role is at stake. Shirley MacLaine and Anne Bancroft, who incidentally both began their careers as dancers, are the old rivals, and ballerina Leslie Brown is the daughter with the youth and talent to take over. Well, that's The Turning Point at 9 o'clock tomorrow, and you see the rest of the evening with, on either side of the film, The Lambeth Boys at 8 o'clock, an award-winning documentary which begins a 3-part series, and at 5 to 11, Dora Russell, who talks about her early life during and after the First World War in the 20th century remembered. The time now is just 9 minutes past midnight. And before we go, let me tell you that BBC One is staying around. They're not going home yet. In fact, they've got a Marx Brothers film, Duck Soup, starting in a couple of minutes. But until we meet again, hopefully sometime tomorrow, from all of us here on BBC Two, may I wish you a very good night. Good night to you. Next tonight, the Thames News headlines, followed by a profile on the great partnership of Torvill and Dean.
Good evening. 30,000 people took to the streets of London today in defence of the GLC and other metropolitan councils being scrapped by the government. It was the biggest demonstration the capital's ever seen on a weekday. Most of inner London schools were shut and telephones in town halls went unanswered. The festival hall was packed for a meeting addressed by a succession of anti-abolition speakers, including GLC chairman Ken Livingstone.
If we all stop spending that money, the government doesn't want us to spend the £700 million, it would barely buy one brand new, fully armed Trident submarine.
The chairman of Thames Water Authority has come out in favour of privatising the water that comes out of our taps. The water industry is worth more than the National Coal Board, and Roy Watts says selling it off would make sound financial sense, so long as there are safeguards to protect consumers. The idea has not been formally adopted at any level, but already it's provoked an angry response from the TUC. Asian leaders in Luton claim relations between them and police in one of the country's biggest immigrant communities have totally broken down. They say homes and businesses were ransacked during a Metropolitan Police investigation into an alleged passports racket. They say up to 200 people were questioned and some were held in custody for 36 hours and denied access to solicitors. Police deny the accusations. Meanwhile, in Reading, contacts between police and community relations leaders are said to be at an all-time low. 4 race relations instructors have boycotted a police training programme at Silmerstead after claims that it's racist. Police say that claim's nonsense. Customs officers have seized half a ton of cannabis from a van parked at Cooper Road in Wimbledon. It has a street value of £750,000. A Dutchman is being questioned. The world's first mass-produced electric van of its kind was driven off the production line at Vauxhall in Luton today. It has a range of up to 60 miles with a top speed of 50 miles an hour and a cost of 2 pence a mile in electricity. There's cold comfort for patients of a Hampstead GP who's adopted an American technique of freezing off warts with liquid nitrogen. He says he gives a 30-second squirt at minus 50 degrees centigrade and the wart blisters and drops off in a few days. The method can also be used for piles, apparently. Thames weather, tonight dry, but a sharp frost with temperatures falling to minus 3 centigrade. Tomorrow, mostly dry and bright, but rain or sleet later. High of 4 centigrade, 39 Fahrenheit. That's it. Now, Torvill and Dean.
Here on The Night on Yorkshire, in a couple of minutes, Birgit Doll stars in the continental movie Trauma. But now, the ITN news headlines.
Tonight's calendar is presented by Christine Talbot and Jeff Druitt.
Evening, welcome to Calendar.
It's Tuesday, the 6th of August. On the programme tonight, signed up for Leeds United, PR guru Max Clifford.
Signed off at Bradford City, the chairman, Geoffrey Richmond.
Dying of cancer, the man given the all clear by his GP.
And tying the knot, the trapeze artist and the circus band.
But first tonight, a story of someone who's in and someone who's out in the football world. A controversial PR guru has been brought in to help improve the image of Leeds United. Max Clifford, often associated with tabloid headlines, has been signed up by the chairman Peter Ridsdale to help the club's in-house public relations team.
Meanwhile, in Bradford, the chairman of the city's football team, Geoffrey Richmond, has called it a day and announced that he is to quit after securing a financial rescue package for the beleaguered club. Well, let's cross over now to Chris Kiddie. He's at Elland Road for the latest on those stories. Chris.
Yes, well, the number of times I've found myself standing here over the past couple of seasons talking about off-the-field activities perhaps shows the need for a new PR guru here at Elland Road. And today, the chairman, Peter Ridsdale, unveiled his new signing.
Max Clifford's appointment was confirmed after he had lunch with the chairman in London today.
You know, we've got very good financial PR people, we've got very good sports PR people within the club. But I think given some of the things we've been through the last few years, it's very important for us now to make sure that we work very closely with the national editors of all the newspapers. I think Max has got the contacts there.
It has been a difficult couple of years for Leeds on the PR front. The court case involving Lee Bowyer, who was cleared of all charges, and Jonathan Woodgate, who was found guilty of a fray. Former manager David O'Leary's book entitled, some say unwisely, Leeds United on Trial, and most recently, the will he, won't he saga of Rio Ferdinand's transfer to rivals Manchester United.
Hopefully, from here on out, things start to get better, and they can concentrate on what they want to concentrate on, is what's going on in the park. It's a new time, new manager, a very forward-thinking chairman, a great squad of players. So, you know, I think that hopefully what I can do is to help them with the media game.
And the view from one long-standing supporter at Elland Road this afternoon.
Yes, I think the fans sometimes have been crying out that the right message don't come out from the club, and we should be more on the back page than the front page, which is not always the club's doing, of course. And I think this is an effort to try and repair some of that damage.
Geoffrey Richmond's departure from the chairmanship after a decade at Valley Parade had been widely expected. He helped steer the club to the Premiership, but rising debts brought it close to extinction. The view of Bradford fans of the end of an era this afternoon.
Morning, Geoffrey.
If we'd have stayed, I think everybody would have been calling for his head.
Well, maybe it's time for him to move on, but he has done a lot for the club.
2 years ago, he threw the dice, he gambled, he brought in Carbone, Dan Petrescu, Collymore. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off.
So, as one familiar face departs at Valley Parade, a new one arrives here at Elland Road. But in the coming season, both clubs must be hoping they make the headlines on the pitch for all the right reasons.
Well, joining me now to discuss both those developments, our sports commentator John Helm. Well, Leeds and Max Clifford first. Now, what the club really needs, surely, is success on the field, and Max Clifford, despite all his skills as a spinner, can't deliver that, can he?
No, the fans are only interested in results, Jeff, but I think they've had so many own goals, haven't they, Leeds, in the last couple of years, that Peter Ridsdale, and nobody has done more than the chairman of Leeds United, in my view, in terms of relationships with the fans. Nobody's done more than him. He's very conscious, I think, of the image now, the way Leeds United are portrayed, and what he's going to be doing, Max Clifford, I'm sure, is talking to the editors down in London, particularly the Mirror Group, and trying to get Leeds United's image improved. It's never been great in London.
But I mean, the fact is, though, I mean, if a couple of players go and misbehave in a nightclub again, I mean, even Max Clifford isn't going to be able to keep that off the front page, is it?
No, what they've got to do is stop the players misbehaving in the first place, isn't it? Or maybe it won't get into the press if they do. And I think a lot of clubs are better at Leeds United at handling this sort of situation. Many clubs, even in lower divisions, make sure that when their players are out, they go out as a group and they don't get into trouble.
I mean, the fact is, I mean, Max Clifford has got a bit of form, hasn't he? He worked for Mohamed El Fayed at Fulham doing a similar job. I mean, was he any good there, do you know?
Well, at Fulham it was slightly different. Would you want to be working in the capital, you know, high-profile players, a man like Al Fayed as well, multi-millionaire, but Fulham don't seem to have too many bad headlines, really. Here, Rio Ferdinand's a classic example. He wanted to get out of London. He was enjoying the life in Leeds. He might be under the microscope even more in Manchester than he was here.
But, I mean, Peter Ridsdale is not a man for making sort of, you know, flamboyant, excessive gestures. He must think he's going to get value for money with this.
Yeah, and we'd like to know what the money is, wouldn't we?
Rather less than Rio Ferdinand, probably.
I'm sure it's a lot less. Yeah, he'll want value for money, but I think what's going to happen is that David Walker and his PR team at Elland Road will work separately to the way Max Clifford is going to be working. I don't think you'll see much of Max Clifford at Elland Road, but he will be working on their behalf in the capital.
Let's move on then to Bradford and the departure of Geoffrey Richmond. I mean, in your view, was that inevitable?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. I think Geoffrey Richmond had set the tone himself when he admitted recently that he'd lost the plot. He actually admitted it to me once at Stuart McCall's testimonial dinner. He admits he gambled, as one of those fans said there. He gambled and he lost over the last 2 years, but he lost to such a colossal tune, £38 million.
But I mean, the part of his career was a great success, wasn't he? He took the club from nowhere up to the Premiership.
Let it go on record that the first 5 or 6 years of Geoffrey Richmond's reign were the most successful in the club's history. You go back to 1911 to them winning the FA Cup. Since then, years in lower divisions, and people never thought they'd live to see the day when he put them in the Premier League.
Very briefly, though, finally, we've got Gordon Gibb, young man from England. Is he going to be able to do the trick, do you think?
Well, one would hope. You never know, Jeff. You never know. But a new breed coming in, and let's hope that youth pays off on. It was time for a change.
John Helm, thanks very much indeed.
Moving on now, and a dying man is hoping to receive a 6-figure payout after a doctor told him a lump under his arm was nothing to worry about. That lump turned out to be cancer, and Malcolm Gregg, who's terminally ill, is claiming almost £250,000 in damages following the GP's mistake. Calendar's Tim Iredale is at the doctor's surgery near Lincoln. Tim.
Yes, this is the health centre in the village of Skellingthorpe near Lincoln, where Malcolm Gregg first saw his GP complaining about a lump under his arm. He left here feeling reassured, believing the lump wasn't serious.
It's a lump of fatty tissue. He said it's not malignant. There's nothing at all to worry about. 8 out of 10 people get something like that in their life. In fact, he's got one himself on his back, he stated. So I came out of the surgery quite relieved.
Since that day, 8 years ago, Mr. Gregg has been living on a cocktail of drugs after discovering the lump under his arm was in fact non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of cancer. The former miner knows his days are numbered, but he believes he's entitled to compensation and is claiming more than £200,000 damages from his doctor.
A monetary gain is nothing for me myself, because if the doctors are correct and the disease takes its course of actions it's expected to do, any monetary gain will be irrelevant to me. But I don't see why my wife and son should be penalised for somebody else's error.
Last year, a judge ruled that GP Andrew Scott was negligent because he didn't refer Malcolm Gregg to a specialist, but rejected his 6-figure claim for damages, saying that earlier diagnosis wouldn't have prolonged his life.
A doctor has done this negligence to him, and yet there's no compensation. And yet people get compensation for the stupidest things, and yet something as important as your life, they're saying no.
Mr. Gregg is now putting in a formal complaint to the Health Authority and has taken his case to the appeal court. Dr. Scott's practice say they can't comment until the case has been resolved by the Court of Appeal. The judgment is due in October. If they don't succeed, then Malcolm Gregg's legal team say they'll take his claim for damages to the highest court in the land, the House of Lords.
Tim Iredale reporting on Malcolm Gregg's battle for compensation. Now, though, here are Fraser, Dave and Vicky with more of the day's news from your particular part of the Calendar region.
Thanks, Jeff. A man's preparing to undergo surgery this evening after being shot when he disturbed 2 intruders at work. The shooting took place at Terry Griffiths Potatoes at Sutton St James in Lincolnshire. The driver, Craig Riley, who's 26 and from Wisbech, pulled into the company's depot in Broadgate Street to find intruders trying to steal a lorry. Mr. Riley is in King's Lynn Hospital as a police search continues for the men who shot him with an air gun.
Craig pulled in about 5:15. He saw one of the lads sort of pull his head round, and then basically he heard a shot. The shot went off and he was down, and there's no vehicles, no getaway, nothing, so the copper said. And that was it.
He's received a puncture wound to his shoulder. He's currently in King's Lynn Hospital, and I gather he's awaiting surgery at this moment in time.
Robert Cleeson, the notorious gunman from Lincolnshire, has been back in court again today in the latest stage of his long-running battle to avoid extradition to America to face double murder charges. Cleeson, who's 69, came to Barts-upon-Humber after he was cleared on a technicality of killing 2 Mormon missionaries in Texas, but he was jailed in Britain for gun offences after police found 50 weapons at his home. The case was adjourned to August the 16th. Police are urging women in Doncaster to be vigilant after a rapist struck twice on consecutive nights in the same part of town. Both victims were prostitutes picked up from the Nether Hall Road area of Christchurch. Both were attacked in isolated areas, the second one at knife point. Detectives believe the rapist will strike again. They say he appears to be targeting prostitutes. They don't believe other women are at risk. Demonstrators turned up today as a public inquiry began into controversial plans to build an incinerator. Protesters gathered outside Hull City Hall to raise their concerns about the proposed plant. There's been widespread opposition to the incinerator amid fears it could lead to health problems for people around the site in the Stone Ferry area. The inquiry will look at these fears and hear evidence from the developers about the need for the plant and how the plant can be run safely.
The health effects are going to be detrimental to the people of Hull, and we want that to be taken into account. And also we want to raise the question of an alternative, which is to increase the amount that's recycled.
Now, one of our region's most celebrated actresses has spoken about her double battle against cancer. Lisa Goddard, who lives in Sydenham in North Norfolk, had to have a mastectomy after twice being diagnosed with the disease. She's now spoken about it publicly for the first time in a programme to be screened on Yorkshire television this week.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
Lisa Goddard has made a career out of her image as the girl next door, starring in scores of television shows and stage plays, and remains one of the region's most celebrated actresses. After failed marriages to Colin Baker and Alvin Stardust, she's now happily wed to her third husband, David. Soon to star in a documentary, The Brothers After They Were Famous, she speaks out about her battles with cancer.
I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1997, and I had several operations, and I had 6 weeks radiotherapy, and continued working at weekends, though they said I shouldn't. And then I thought it was all over and done with, and then in 2000, the year my son got married, it returned, so then I had to have a mastectomy and reconstruction, and was really quite poorly for quite a while.
Despite Lisa's health problems, life is busier than ever, and she's still in big demand.
When I was looking at the future, I thought I was either going to be Judi Dench and be a great stage actress, or I was going to be a huge film star. Neither of those things have happened. But I have enjoyed my career, and I'm still working, which always amazes me, because every time I finish it, I think, that's it, I'll never work again. So I'm still working.
Incredibly, Lisa is now a grandmother and enjoys a settled family life in rural Norfolk.
And you can see more of that interview in After They Were Famous, The Brothers, on ITV this Sunday at 8 o'clock. Work's begun today on a new sports stadium in Boston, and it's said to be the first of its kind in the world. The new stadium will provide facilities for both disabled and able-bodied athletes. It'll be used for both athletics and rugby. The stadium is costing £6 million and is expected to be open in May next year. Meanwhile, Boston United have decided not to appeal against the decision of the deduction of 4 league points after breaking FA rules. Boston gained promotion to the Football League by winning the conference last season. Their league status was thrown into doubt, though, when they were charged with financial irregularities involving players' wages. In the end, the FA decided not to throw them out of the league. They'll be docked 4 points this season and fined £100,000. And that's just about it from me at Calendar East. Now it's time to go back to Jeff and Christine. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Now it's time to look ahead at what the weather has in store for us. I can get my teeth in with John Mitchell. Are we still in for this downpour?
Well, you know, we're always fine-tuning these forecasts, and yesterday I said Thursday was going to be a downpour.
Yes.
Good news and bad news. Thursday looks as though it's going to be okay now. Bad news, Saturday's a deluge. A lot of heavy rain around on Saturday.
So you got it wrong.
So yeah, well, we'll call it fine-tuning, Christine. Call it fine-tuning. Hopefully I'll be wrong. It won't be wet on Saturday as well.
No, perhaps you'll come on tomorrow night, so it's going to be not going to be Saturday then.
You never know, Jeff. You never know. We've got a nice picture tonight from Sam Bilton, who's aged 7 from Willoughby near Hull. Now, there's a little bit of everything on that picture, isn't there? Which I suppose is representative of our summer, really. There's a nice rainbow there.
Yes,
1 or 2 heavy showers.
A bit like a weather forecast, having it all ways, you know.
Yes, I know what you're like, you weather forecasters. So.
Well, I can tell you something for nothing. Go to the coast tomorrow. Lots of showers inland. Should be nice on the coast.
So we've got that to look forward to. We may or may not have a shower on Thursday, but we definitely will on Saturday.
And we should go to the coast tomorrow.
Lots of showers.
Yeah, full forecast obviously coming up after the programme. And we'll also be having weather forecasters past and present in a minute because Bob